he said very specifically, be still. And I had the distinct impression that I wasn't supposed to tell anybody what the problem was. If this is God, then he's about to do something really, really cool. If it's not God, then... So those couple days were nerve-wracking.
This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. Those moments when heaven and earth collide. And we see God, we see his hand reaching out to us, attempting to get our attention. I'm your host, Trapper Jack. Let's call it the daily wrestling match. Some people call it prayer. You know, I'm saying something. Are you hearing me? Did you just say something? Am I getting it? Am I communicating? Or how come you don't talk to me? It's a wrestling match every day. So today, what do we have? Prophetic listening. What is that? 5 ways to hear God. Sure, there's different ways. Maybe you missed it. You know, when he had that little internal voice in you say something. This is the wrestling match. Did he say something? Why doesn't he talk to me? That's why I love this episode with Michelle Honora, because we're going to get into these different ways God speaks to us that we might be missing, that God offers to us in his own special way. And in Michelle's case, this started pretty early on in her life. She's only in her early 30s now, but this has been going on for a while, and she's just developing it and kind of sharing with others this. So her story begins, her folks came to the U.S. from Nigeria, and they were Christian.
My dad is Catholic. My mom grew up Episcopalian. So it was very much, they were kind of freaked out by born-again believers. They were kind of like, yeah, we're Christian, but we're not born again. Because they just thought the expression was out there.
Yeah.
And
look a bit like Nicodemus. He wasn't quite sure what to make of that either.
Exactly. So me growing up, I grew up, familiar with the pews, the traditional church. But then after a while, I think when I was around 9 or 10, we just stopped going.
And what brought you in?
On the subway of New York, when I was on my way to a modeling audition, a complete stranger with this big black trash bag was handing out Jesus tracts, didn't say a word, just handed them out, kept walking. Pamphlets that have either cartoons on them or maybe a story in them or something that explicitly states what the gospel is.
And you were how old then?
I was 15.
15? Yeah,
I was on my way to that audition. I was sitting next to a friend who's also going to that audition, and I read hers, and it was like this big light bulb came on, and I just knew, this is what I need to do to be saved and to come to the Lord. And for a while, I just felt confident. I'm like, good, I'm saved. I'm not going to hell. Yay. I treated it like fire insurance. I was like, I'm good. I'm saved. Now I can just live my life however I want to. Not realizing that there's more to the journey with God.
Along the way, at Touched by Heaven, we kind of just talk about these experiences and whatnot. Were there any to kind of help you along the way in terms of guiding you?
Yeah, I feel like in the very beginning, looking back on it, I can see God's hand on it. When I was 17 years old, it suddenly occurred to me that there was just one book in my collection that I had yet to read. And I realized it was a Christian book that my mom had purchased for a dime at the library 3 years prior. It was a novel. Yeah. It was called Secrets by Robin Jones Gunn. And the funny thing is, I ended up meeting Robin Jones Gunn in person almost 10 years later. And all I could do is just thank her for her writing and her work, because I wouldn't be I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for what she did. I actually had this weird desire to read the Bible all the time. So I would take it with me to my high school classes, and I didn't care who saw it. And I would just read it in my spare time. And
so you were that girl at school
I was.
You were that. She carries the Bible with her. I don't know. You ever talk to her? I don't know. That's just weird. So weird. You were that girl.
I was that girl. And
public school, right?
Public school. Mm-hmm. I was already kind of the oddball though, because I mean, like, oh, she models, and oh, she does that, and oh, she wrote a book. Like, oh, okay. So that was the start of it. And then right around that time that I really got plugged into my faith, this little school from California that I'd never heard of before called Biola University Biola actually stands for Bible Institute of Los Angeles, reached out and started recruiting me out of nowhere. And I was in Maryland.
Although the school accepted her, what they didn't enroll her in automatically was what she wanted most, which was film school. So, yeah, you can come into the school, but they put her on a waiting list as far as the film school part.
This was around the time that God really started to speak to me pretty consistently. I mean, he probably already had been, but the first time I really knew that I was hearing him, I started walking my school's track every morning at 5 a.m. And I basically would walk the track and pray. And I was beseeching God to let me in, let me in the film program. Because I was freaking out about it. And one morning, as I was midway through my walk and my praying time, I just heard God say, "Michelle, shut up." And I was like, "Did you just tell me to shut up?" And he goes, "Yeah, just shut up for a second."
Interior voice?
And interior.
Okay.
And he just played before my mind like a movie of what he had been doing with me in those previous 2 weeks. And he just showed me conversation after conversation of, encounters that I'd had with people who were already in the program, opportunities to see showings of films that had been made through the program, opportunities to tour the studio and all these things. And I just felt like he was telling me in my spirit, I'm trying to get you excited for what I'm about to do for you. And as soon as he said that, it was like just revelation and peace that completely washed over me. And I remember walking back to my dorm that morning, feeling this complete sense of assurance that it was all going to work out in my favor. 2 days later, I got the acceptance letter.
Wow. But you had that complete confidence. Oh, I am taken care of. I'm okay.
Exactly. I did the film school stuff. At Biola, every student who attends gets their minor in theology as well. It's kind of baked into the curriculum, taking 30 units of Bible courses. So I would say that Biola was probably uber beneficial for my theological grounding and my biblical understanding. That to me was kind of worth its weight in gold. And I didn't realize it at the time how important that would be. But I went to Biola. I worked my butt off because it was during the recession. My mom lost her job shortly into my freshman year. My dad was hanging on to his business by a thread, and my parents had split. So I was especially concerned for my mom because, she was a single mom and she now doesn't have a job. So I worked 3 jobs and I paid my own way through school. And I worked extra hours to send money home to her. And I didn't really feel like I had a safety net. So it was a challenging time. And I think in some ways that challenged my relationship with the Lord a little bit because I kept having to ask him, okay, are you really my provider? Can I really rely on you? Like,
did you have kind of a Jonathan Rumi moment? Are you familiar with his moment? The guy who
no.
plays Jesus in The Chosen?
Oh, when he was about ready to throw in the towel
Yeah.
on the acting
He's
stuff?
down on his knees going, okay, I thought you wanted me to do this. I got nothing. I mean, the food was gone. Money's gone. He's got nothing. And he did kind of what he calls now, he says, now I realize it was kind of, there's this surrender prayer that's out there. Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. And he really did that from the heart. And like that day, he got like $3,000 in checks out of nowhere that paid every bill he had. It was just one of those, again, that confirmation moment that, oh, you do have me kind of thing.
I love that. Yeah, I actually had something like that happen a little bit in college, but more acutely, mid to late 20s. God paid all of my bills in 24 hours supernaturally.
Tell us.
I knew you were going to ask. So was writing books full time and kind of making a small living out of that. And then in my mid-20s, I moved to San Diego and was working a corporate job. I hated the job. The job hated me. And within a year and a half, I was fired from that job. Yeah, it was in 2018. I was ghostwriting, and I was basically doing like gig work to stay afloat. And I was ghostwriting for a pastor, and I had secured like a $10,000 ghostwriting contract. And I'm thinking, yes, God provided. This is great. Um, until the pastor ghosted me and ghosted me and my payment and my rent money. And
He
uh,
disappeared.
he disappeared. Yeah, there was a big portion that he owed me that he simply did not pay and disappeared. Well, I was freaking out because at that point, I had next to nothing in savings. It's June 29th. My rent is due, obviously, on July 1st. Thankfully, July 1st is a Sunday, so technically it's due July 2nd. But hey, like, what's going to happen here? And the Lord just told me so matter of factly. He was like, "Don't worry, I'm going to pay your rent."
Again, that
And
interior kind of thing. You weren't walking around a track that day.
nope, I wasn't walking around a track. I was actually sitting in the very apartment that I was panicking about how to pay for, and he just told me in this still small voice, kind of telepathically, "Don't worry, I'm going to pay your rent." And he said very specifically, "Be still." And of course, like most people, kind of a go-getter and let me fix it. What do I need to do to fix it? How can I correct this? And he kept telling me the same thing, "Be still." And I had the distinct impression that I wasn't supposed to tell anybody what the problem was. I wasn't supposed to share anything about it. I wasn't supposed to try to fix it or solve it or ask for money or try to borrow money, nothing. And so those couple of days were kind of scary because I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this is God, then he's about to do something really, really cool. And I get to be the benefactor of it. If it's not God, then I kind of screwed myself over here. And
Yeah, if I'm just having an imagination attack.
right. So those couple days were nerve wracking.
But you
Sunday
followed the orders. You didn't talk about it, didn't tell anybody. I'm just going to sit it out, and it's coming.
Exactly.
Dear God,
Yep.
please, it's coming. Yeah.
Yep. Prayed a lot, but kept my mouth shut and kept my hands still. And Sunday rolls around, and it's a July 1st. I wake up, and immediately the Lord tells me, "I want you to go to church." Well, I'm thinking, are you sure you want me to go to church? Because my tags are expired. And that could be a whole other can of worms if I get pulled aside by a cop. Not to mention that I barely have any gas in the car. I had enough to like get there. But he told me, he's like, "I want you to go to church." So I did. And I get to the church, and nobody knows, nobody has a clue how stressed out I am, how worried I am. I truly did my best to just put on a bright face. And when I got to, and I'm not saying that believers should do that. Like if you're struggling with something, you don't have to hide it. But it just in that moment, I wanted to focus as much as I could on worshiping him and just trusting that he would do it. And I do remember going up to the altar and praising and worshiping and starting to cry because I was scared, but I also still knew that God was good, even in the midst of what was going on in my fear. So I go back to my seat, sit down, church starts. And there's a period at that church where the pastor would allow people to kind of greet each other and talk for a little bit, mingle for a little bit. This small elderly woman comes up to me out of nowhere. She like beelines to me, to my seat. And she says, "Michelle, God told me to pay your rent. How much is it?" And I'm telling you, I was so taken aback. I almost said, "No, you don't have to do that." I quickly shut my mouth.
Yeah. Do you know this woman at all?
Oh yeah, I knew her. We weren't super close, but I knew her.
Okay.
And just one of the ladies that I see at church, wave, say hi to. But yeah, she came up to me and she was like, God told me to pay your rent. How much is it? And mind you, this is in San Diego. So rent over there is like a mortgage payment anywhere else. And I told her, and she said, okay, I'll pay that, and I'll throw in an extra 400, for groceries or, other incidentals. I mean, the relief that I felt, Trapper, washing over me, as well as the awe of like, oh my God, he did it. And not only, oh my God, he did it, but oh my God, I heard him right.
Yeah, I got this one right. Wow.
Yes. I was like, thank you,
Wow.
Lord.
That's amazing. Go ahead. Give us a number. Go ahead. What's the number? Plus the 400.
Okay. So, well, I'll start with that. So my rent was 1635. She gave me well over $2,000. And then the story doesn't end there though.
Okay.
Because God likes to do exceedingly above what we could ask, think, or imagine. So she finishes, letting me know, hey, I'm going to give you the money. Like, give me your details so I can forward it to you. As soon as she leaves, I get a text from somebody else in the church who had no clue what was going on. She said in the text, don't leave without seeing me. So after church, I go to see her. She hands me this envelope. It's stuffed with $500. She said, somebody in the church wanted me to pass this to you anonymously. So at this point, we're reaching what, 2,500? Then I go to this like after church lunch gathering or whatever. Somebody else there slips wads of cash in my purse. By the time I drove home, Trapper, every single bill was covered and incidental.
You walk home with about $3,000.
Yeah.
Ooh, you got Jonathan Rumi money. That's what he got. That's where that money came from. Wow. That's just stunning. And it starts with and if you don't go to church,
Yeah.
there's just everything lined up. Everything. Stunning. At what point do you cry?
Oh my gosh. Like at that point, I'd already been crying. So at this point, I'm just laughing. I mean, the levity in my heart and the gratitude was overwhelming. Just unbelievable. And this happened over 5 years ago, and I can still feel just the visceral sense of, wow, my dad took care of me.
Yeah. And to trust the be still and go to church. You're hearing it, and to kind of drop this in now. This is kind of what you do for a living now. That is helping people hear that voice, that prophetic voice. This is why you do what you do, is because this is very real.
Yes. I run the Center for Prophetic Listening, and it's basically a Christian education center dedicated to teaching people what prophetic listening is. And prophetic listening it's an advanced form of spiritual direction. And basically it's listening to Holy Spirit with another believer, discerning the voice of God, learning how to tune out the enemy and your own flesh and kind of worldly thoughts, and honing in on God's voice alone so that you can then be obedient to what he says. Because there are two components to hearing God, right? There's isolating what he's trying to say to you and actually receiving what he says. But then there's being obedient. And we all have a choice to be obedient or not. I had a choice to go to church or shrug it off and say, no, that's ridiculous. My tags are expired. Why would I do that? The woman who gave me that money, she had a choice to say, yes, I will do this, even though this is that's a lot of money. Yeah. Or no, I'm not going to do that. Devil's a liar. You're not telling me that. We all
am I hearing God's voice, or is this just a big joke from the other side?
Exactly.
know.
Yeah.
And that's always
Yeah.
the battle. Who am I hearing here? Because it's our own voice. Generally speaking, when we hear a voice, it's our own voice because that's our voice, but it's
Mhm.
not my thought. It's just my voice. You know.
Yeah.
I assume that's kind of the way you hear most of it also.
Yeah. When I hear God speaking, and as time has gone on, his voice in my heart has become more distinctive and kind of easier to pull out. And in the beginning, when I started hearing God speak, and I will give Biola University props for this because they put a high value on students being able to hear God. We used to have chapels every day, and we had certain Saturday chapels that were devoted to hearing God's voice. In fact, it was at Biola that I learned Lectio Divina, and really listening to God through the scriptures. As far as how I hear and process God's voice in the beginning, it used to be, okay, if I hear a thought or if I hear something coming in as a thought and it's that thought telling me to do something I don't want to do or giving me a perspective that I don't really want to hear, and I know it's biblical, then I know that's God. Like, that was my criteria in the
Okay.
beginning because
Okay.
he used to, either give me corrections or convict me in my spirit or actually just in some ways invite me to think outside of myself and be basically a more generous human being, part of the whole sanctification process. But as I grew closer and closer to God, Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. So I found myself wanting and longing for the things that he wanted and longed for and that he had planted inside of me. And his voice, it's kind of like a muscle. My ability to distinguish between his voice and mine became more and more distinct. And I feel like I'm having conversations with the Father all the time, all day long. Have you heard of The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence?
I have not.
Ooh, you're in for a treat.
Okay.
You got to check that book out.
Okay.
All your listeners, y'all got to check that book out
Okay.
because he was a 16th century monk, I believe, 16th or 17th century monk, and he wrote this book on basically experiencing God's presence in every fiber of your day. And what he would do, whether he was mopping the floor or cooking for the monastery or running errands, he did it with the understanding that Jesus was right there with him. And it just, that to me was a game changer in my walk with God. I came across that book in my early 20s, and ever since then I feel like I'm having an ongoing conversation with the Lord.
Yeah, there's a lot of us doing that. I guess we did. I think of Therese Lassie always talked about the little way, and you're kind of,
Yes.
she's always with them. Yeah, always with them, doing those little things during the course of a day. Same idea. I've
Yeah.
said many times here that it changes everything when you put Jesus in the room. It changes your
Mm-hmm.
conversations with people. It just changes everything, your whole outlook.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you're not alone. You're never alone. That kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's very valuable. Yeah, I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a game changer. This is kind of this is beyond all your imaginations,
Yes.
and suddenly it's like you are real, and you're not
Mm-hmm.
just financial. You're in everything, but the financial certainly does wake us up in this world when it's because we live in this world, right? We live in this world.
Yeah.
What
Mm-hmm.
changes for you after that? Right after that, what happens?
Right after that situation bolstered my confidence to know, okay, I do hear God's voice, even if I'm hearing something that it doesn't make sense in the natural. The Lord had told me this is going to be a time of radical trust, and that season of radical trust and what I call radical obedience. So what ended up happening was, even though God paid the rent for that particular month, I did end up having to give up the apartment. And during that same month, my car died. So now I don't have transportation. My apartment, my dream apartment that I worked really hard to get, is gone. And I was very angry, and I just didn't understand what was going on, and I wanted to get off of that track of radical obedience. And I told God, you know what? I'm done with this. Screw this. I'm going to go back to New York. I'm going to stay with my dad. I'm going to get a regular job. I'm not doing this supernatural, crazy stuff anymore. And God was super gentle in his response to me, but also very direct. He told me, Michelle, I understand that you're disappointed. I understand that you're hurt. I want you to know that I am taking care of you, and I'm going to take care of you. And then he told me, if you go to New York, I will still bless you, but you will have missed out on my best for you.
See, I get bits and pieces. You're getting full paragraphs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I always have a journal. I mean, not always, but most of the time when I'm sitting and really intentionally listening to God, I always have a journal on hand because he's about to give me a download. Like, I have more than a dozen journals of God, speaking into my life. So I stayed, and for the next 2 years, I lived in San Diego, without paying a dime of rent anywhere that I lived. And I was never homeless. I was never on the street. God started to do this interesting thing where he would tell key people at certain points of my journey, you need to let Michelle stay with you. Invite her to live with you.
And it was their idea.
Yes, it was their initiation, their idea. I wouldn't say a word. They would just come up to me and they would say, do you need a place to live? Like, God told me that he wants you to stay with me. And I'm talking nice places too. There was a condo in Del Mar that I stayed in for 8 months. There was a mansion in Vista that I stayed in. There was a lake house in Lake Arrowhead. They let me have the whole house.
Gee.
For a period.
2 years of this stuff.
Yes. And God provided I was never hungry. It didn't, did I have a ton of cash rolling in? No, I had like some royalties from my books coming in, but he would just provide. And if I, for some reason I ran short on cash, somebody would come up to me and say, God told me to give you this. And so it was 2 years of living on and surviving on literally his word and being obedient to whatever he told me to do. And it was during this period that prophetic listening actually was more sincerely birthed, because I started to encounter people who were going through seasons of transition or seasons of or situations of acute, either financial, relational, or emotional stress, and they were talking to me about it, and I'm like, well, what did God say? Because at this point, it had become natural to me to just ask God and do whatever he said, even if it didn't make sense.
And as you know, most people don't ask, do they?
Most people don't.
Let's pause right about here. Then more with Michelle, and also a test that I think I just received. But first, a quick Patreon shout out. Thank you, Gwen. Gwen Sebastian has joined our Patreon family. And thank you so much for doing so to help keep this all going. Two fuels here. Need your stories at touchedbyheaven.net. And yes, we do need your support too. You can come here to this episode. Or you can go to patreon.com and simply search for Trapper Jack. And thank you so much for making this all go. And before we go back to my conversation with Michelle, I thought I would go to one of her videos because she talks about, in this video, the 5 ways. There are 5 ways of hearing God. There is the audible voice. And you always have to discern the spirits. It's so important that you make sure it's coming from the good guys. We've talked about that so many times here in the episode. Where I want to pick it up from here is that internal voice that often is that soft, ever so soft, sometimes too soft voice of God in conversation with us. Let's pick it up in the video from there.
The best way that I can equate the still small voice in this day and age is a thought. It's a thought that comes to you, but it's not your own thought. It's a thought that just kind of lands in your spirit or bubbles up inside of you, and you know that it's not you thinking it, right? So where he's communicating his thoughts with us through our thoughts, and over time, as you grow and develop the practice of listening for God's voice on a regular basis, what does it look like to build that muscle, that listening muscle? Eventually, it becomes easier and easier to hear God's voice, and it becomes easier and easier to discern his voice apart from your thoughts, your ideas, your desires. Other listening styles include images. God can speak to his people through images that can come into your mind's eye, and they just know that they know, oh, okay, this is not for me. This is something that God is showing me. I want you to be mindful that if you're getting a picture in your mind's eye and you think that it's communicating something to you, sometimes that is God's way of speaking to you. In fact, I have done listening sessions with people who only hear God through images. Those are kind of the challenging ones because they'll get an image, they'll get a picture, and then we have to interpret and decipher what God means by that image. Sometimes people will see colors. Sometimes people will see actual like words, kind of like a caption or a cartoon. They'll see words. So if you're a visual person or you're more visually inclined, images can be another way that God speaks to his children. Another way that God speaks to his children is through what I call the unction of the Spirit. It's a feeling, it's a knowing, it's an inner knowing that it's kind of like a gut check. You know that you know that you know X, Y, and Z. You may not know why you know it, but you just know in your core that something is true, something is a fact, or you have an impression. I've heard people describe this when they have felt like they were in danger. And then there are other times when, he's indicating something in your gut that isn't negative. He's just sharing information. So for those of you who are feelers, that is a very legitimate way that God can speak to his children is through your inner knowing, a feeling or knowing. And then another way that God can speak to his children is through music. And this is really fun. So I remember I did a prophetic listening session pretty recently with a gentleman who he hears God through music all the time. God is constantly sharing his message through the lyrics of songs. And a lot of times they're secular songs. So God can use anything as a means of communicating what he wants to say. And music can be a very effective tool.
Huh, a guy who hears music and gets messages that way. Huh, wonder who that could be. Well, Okay, we're going to get back to Michelle in just a moment here, but I have to tell you something first. This is the test I mentioned. This, I think, is a test. Michelle mentioned earlier about it's not just hearing, right? It's not just hearing God, it's obeying God. And okay, so I think I'm being called to obedience and telling you something that otherwise I would just keep to myself to see if it checked out. It seems to be a little test on the prophetic of what's coming down the road, say in 2 days. I'm just going to take you through the experience. My wife and I watch a show called Only Murders in the Building. It's on Hulu. What we like about it, there's this backdrop of a murder, right? But there's also Steve Martin and Martin Short, very funny guys, along with Selena Gomez. And they are podcasters. They play the role of podcasters in the true crime genre, okay? So they are actually attempting to solve crimes, murder in the building, their apartment building and such. So they're now in their third season. They've just had the 9th of 10 episodes. So on the next episode, Tuesday, it will be released of Who Done It in this season, okay? Who done it? They have you leaning towards this woman named Donna. So a couple of nights ago, I wake up in the middle of the night and I start hearing the theme to this show, Only Murders in the Building, and it's a great theme. So I'm hearing the theme and I'm wondering why am I hearing the theme? And then I hear internal words, not audible, interior. I hear the same sex. That's what I hear. The same sex. I take that to mean, I discern that to mean that the murderer and the murdered are of the same sex. Well, the one who got murdered was a guy, so I'm getting the message that the murderer is also a guy. That's the message I get from that. And then, you know how Michelle talked about how sometimes you just get infused knowledge? What I felt was an infused knowledge of, oh, it's Donna's son. I think his name is Cliff. I think it's Cliff. Anyway, the message is he did it. He being of the same sex as the guy who was murdered. But then I get this other bit of information, this discerning that the words that were given to me were not, it's a guy, it was the same sex. Generally, you hear that phrase in terms of it was a same-sex relationship. It was a same-sex marriage. So this leads me to discern that the murderer and the murdered were having a same-sex relationship. This is something that it hasn't even been touched on. This topic has never been mentioned in any way, shape, or form during the 9 previous episodes as we go for the big conclusion. And I'm also getting this other song by the Beatles called Run for Your Life. There's a lot of references to Little Girl, but if you take Little Girl out of it, you get lyrics like this. Well, I'd rather see you dead than to see you with another man. You better run for your life if you can. Catch you with another man. That's the end. Well, you know that I'm a wicked guy, and I was born with a jealous mind. Let this be a sermon. I mean everything I said. I'd rather see you dead than to see you with another man. Dun-dun-dun. Cliff did it, and that's why he did it. And that'll be revealed on Tuesday. Why is there a test on this? Perhaps because of maybe last week's episode where we said a lot of things. So if I don't pass this simple little test compared to that, perhaps I shouldn't go down the predicting prophetic line anymore. Perhaps.
Oh,
that is my prophetic, I won't say guess. What would you call that? That's
conjecture.
That's my conjecture. That's my discernment out of all of that. And now we're going to find out whether I'm right.
I'm excited to find out.
So am I. And if I'm wrong, I got egg all over my face right now, just coating me.
And that's okay because you could just go again, right?
And that's the deal.
We don't stone prophets anymore.
Yeah. What's that?
I said we don't stone prophets anymore.
No, Lord knows we should. You know. What do you want to go at? I always ask, what's the takeaway? So what's the takeaway?
Takeaway is that God's voice is as loud today as it was in biblical times, and he's just waiting for us to tune into the frequency.
Amen. And if they want to get a hold of you, how do they do that, Michelle?
If you want to get a hold of me, you can go to www.propheticlistening.com. You can also check out my podcast, the Prophetic Listening Podcast, The Art of Hearing God's Perfect Will. And if you're wanting to grow in your prophetic education, you could join our certification program on propheticlistening.com.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you for this, Michelle. This has been great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michelle. And all of Michelle Lenora's contact information is in the show notes. What is all of this? This is because God does want to have that communication with us, daily communication, that call it a wrestling match of prayer every day. And this can be part of it. And these are different ways God certainly can speak to us, and we are to hear him. When you think about what is a prophet is somebody who hears the voice of God, obeys the voice of God. And that's what I love about Michelle. As you heard from her teen years to now, it's all about what do you want, God? Hearing it, obeying it, following it. That's the life we are all called to. Thanks again, Michelle. I want to know what your story is here at touchedbyheaven.net. I appreciate your support at patreon.com. And I hope that we can do this again next week. Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. I'm Trapper Jack. So happy I went through this whole interview without once saying,
Michelle, God told me to pay your rent.